You're listening to another ambitious Entrepreneur Network.com podcast, the voice for entrepreneurs and small business. Now, onto the show.
Welcome to Industry Thought Leader Podcast. Stand out, be heard, influence. Want to influence real change with your message while become known as an authority in your field? Industry Thought Leader Podcast will show you how. Now, over to your host, Anne-Marie Cross.
And welcome to another episode of Industry Thought Leader Podcast, brought to you by Industry Thought Leader Academy. Stand out, be heard, and influence. I'm your host, Anne-Marie Cross, also known as the Podcasting Queen. Now, today, my guest says leadership is the performing art of getting others to willingly work towards a shared purpose. Joining me on today's show is Alain Hunkins. Now, he helps high-achieving people become high-achieving leaders. Now, over his 20-year career, Alain has worked with over 2,000 groups of leaders in 25 countries. Now, in addition to being a leadership speaker, a consultant, a trainer, and coach, Alain is the author of the best-selling Cracking the Leadership Code, 3 Secrets to Building Stronger Leaders. Now, whether you're a solopreneur or you're a leader of a team, today's episode and his book and his content is certainly relevant for you. And on today's show, he's going to share the top 4 things that foster innovation and which one is the most important. The key thing a leader can do to foster innovation, an innovative culture, as well as top tips and tools to get rid of unnecessary complexity. Such an important topic in such an important time. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. Thanks.
So what got you into, well, I'd like to get you to share your backstory, if you will, because sometimes the journey can really provide some wonderful context and insights. But around innovation, because innovation often requires going into the unknown. And I've been seeing a lot of content online about how many people don't like uncertainty. They don't like change. And, in the world today, all of us has been thrust into uncertainty and change in some form of description. So give us a little bit of your backstory, if you would.
Yeah, sure. I love that you brought up the sense about uncertainty. I had this great mentor who said, part of being a leader, and I'd say part of being an innovator, it's about learning how to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Doesn't mean it feels good. It does mean, though, that you start to recognize those signals and reframe them instead of panicking and freaking out. Is how do you deal with that? So in terms of my backstory, yeah, it's interesting talking about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and going into the mess of the creative process. I come from a family of performing artists. Actually, my father's family are all professional musicians. My grandmother, my father's mother, was the first woman violinist to play with the Radio City Music Hall Orchestra. Back before they had blind auditions, and my dad's sister, his oldest sister, was a cellist. She actually was you know who Yo-Yo Ma is, right? Everyone knows who Yo-Yo Ma. Anyway, she used to beat Yo-Yo Ma in cello competitions when they were young. So she became the first cellist in the Cleveland Orchestra for years. And all of which to say is a big part of becoming a professional performing artist, whether it's a musician or an actor and everything. It's about learning to, number one, separate yourself from the work, which is a really tough thing to do. Because on the one hand, you have to have a thick enough skin to not take things personally. But on the other hand, you have to have a thin enough skin to be sensitive and nuanced to what's going on and take the quality very personally. So even there, we're embracing a paradox. So I'm not going to come up with a lot of cookie cutter, it's all this, it's all that answers. I mean, a lot of this is how do we swim in the sea of ambiguity and get used to all of that. Yeah. So for me, and I was a violinist for years, and then I went on and I trained as a professional actor. So I have all this performing arts background, but I was also very interested in psychology, and I got involved with doing group process facilitation. So I was facilitating deep emotional individual process work using psychodrama and doing conflict resolution, first in schools and then in corporations. So I've had my hand in playing in all these different things. So, it's not something, this career is not something that I would have planned for, but it has definitely emerged over time. And part of it is noticing what's working and to continue to do more of that, which I think I'm sure you find as an entrepreneur, it's so important to do something. You can't just sit here and think about what the perfect strategy is. I have a sign over my desk. It says progress over perfection every day.
Yeah, it's so true, and I love that you shared that story, and I love that I really encourage you to do that, because one of the things that I am finding, and I say this all the time, is that our experiences and a lot of our innate gifts, and for you it's the creativity, and you are nurtured in that too.
Yeah.
Your creativity has very much become part of who you are, how you show up, the journey that you've walked, and beautifully that you said you started doing these things, and then you've brought in other aspects of different fields and things that you've learned, and how often we take that for granted, but that can be the greatest gift, the greatest offering, and the greatest area that you can support others. And it's interesting because I'm finding even one of my clients very creative in the arts, and she's all about bringing that creativity back into the workplace and individual lives, because there's something that we've lost within that creative space, that ability to just be. And I have found, even in myself, when you trust that place and you gather together a group of like-minded people, and you sit in that visionary, that dreaming. I mean, let's challenge the status quo, and that, oh, you're just a dreamer. Well, guess what? Some of the greatest ideas have come from those people who were there dreaming and didn't allow, all of these kind of things to inhibit that thought. That is what's going to drive that whole innovation. So let's embrace that and bring that out with real passion. So thank you. So let's talk about the top 4 things that foster innovation. Which one is the most important? But before we do that, talk to us what your different definition of innovation. Let's make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah. So my definition of innovation is interesting. So I believe innovation is about doing something in a new or different way that brings value to, we can call it your customer. And that could be, your customer could be you, depending on how. So I'm going to hold that customer very lightly, but it's around doing something new and useful that brings value. And I think I just want to unpack that definition for a moment, because a lot of it is simple. I think everyone knows new, okay, hasn't been done. It's not old, it's new. Got it. Useful, I can get my hands around that. It's functional, it's utilitarian. Where I think the definition gets interesting is around providing value. Because value is very subjective, right? So I want to share, so some of my work in innovation has brought me working with different companies and been on focus groups with different companies. So I was working with a company that creates medical products of various kinds. Some are kind of home consumer medical products. And one product that they created basically a product for the very real medical condition of male incontinence. Now, this, by the way, the people that tend to have the symptoms for male incontinence are men who have had strokes, as well as men who've had post-traumatic stress disorder. So you'll get a lot of returning war veterans potentially with male incontinence. So they were doing this focus group for this product. And basically product is worn like an undergarment to deal with the effects of incontinence, right? And so they were doing this focus group, and all of the people from the company were asking their customers about the usefulness. So did it fit? How is the absorbability? All this stuff. And one of the guys had been a war vet, and he'd come back and say, "You guys don't get it. You don't get it at all. What my issue is with your product. And you're talking about all this. No, you don't understand. See, when I go in, and in the US, we would call them like CVS or Walgreens, one of those large retail, pharmacy chains. He said, when I go into my local CVS, do you know where I have to go to find your product? It's right in the middle of the feminine hygiene aisle. How do you think that makes me feel?" And then he said, and if that wasn't enough, he said, "I have a 3-year-old at home and just got out of diapers. Your product looks exactly like those diapers. How do you think that makes me feel?" So again, this value had nothing to do with the actual functionality of the project. So here's a cool thing that the company did. They realized, okay, well, we can talk to the drugstores and have them move it in the aisles, move it somewhere else. That was an easy fix. The other one was interesting because to produce the finished product, they had to do an extra step of bleaching the product white. right? So what they stopped doing, they stopped that last step and they rebranded it with a kind of natural gray color. So it looked different, didn't look like a diaper.
Mhm.
And over the course of the next year, sales went up by 300% just with those two changes. So it's again, understanding value is a perceptions business. And so for us as potential innovators, I always love, and I'll go to Jeff Bezos on this one. And you probably have heard the story, but when Amazon started, they used to have meetings and they'd bring in the empty chair. And the empty chair represented that was the customer. So as
Yeah.
you are thinking about all this innovating, remember who is the person you are trying to create the value for, as
Yeah.
opposed to, I think this is neat. The world has been littered with products from engineers who like, oh, we could put this bell and this whistle and this function and that. And at the end of the day, frankly, most of us, what we want is ease of use and simplicity. I mean, hence again, why Apple has done so well with so many of their products, because that simple aesthetic is such a key component of everything they do.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. I love that example that you shared too. I think examples often bring home the principles that we want to share, and then we can start to recognize. I mean, that's a creative process too, isn't it? We get our creative juices flowing. Have you heard a lot of I think it was called the Disney process? Actually, Walt Disney brought this into his team, and he had 3 different specific processes where he'd get people around the table and he'd go, well, now we're in the visionary, we're in the dreamer stage. Let's just think of lots of different ideas, and everyone would bring that to the table. And then what they would do is they would say, well, now we want to go into the realist. Let's have a look at some of these dreams. What would the realists say? How would they challenge that? What would they bring up? And then the last process was looking at it through the eyes of the critic. Now looking at that, and then once the critic had identified some steps, well, let's go back to the dreamer and we'll problem solve that way. So I think what often happens is we only look at it through the lens of a specific area, whether it be the dreamer or the visionary, the realist or the critic. But so often we go to the critic or we run off. And one of the examples that we had was someone said, we always have trouble with spaghetti on our forks, and we sit there whining. We would save time by creating forks that actually had that spiral, but they never asked, well, why would we want that perceived value?
Yeah.
But they went ahead and produced, and I think there was I don't know how many thousands sitting in a factory that had absolutely no use. So creativity is fantastic, innovation is fantastic, but there are some things that you want to spend some time on to really going to land. So
well, what's so interesting is you described that Disney process. If you look at, I've studied the history of innovation, and so there was a guy named Alex Osborne. He had this. He was one of BBDO, was an advertising company, and he was the O in BBDO, Osborne, and he is known as kind of the father of brainstorming. And through his work, and they started the Center for Creative Problem Solving. And it's gone on since then. It's sort of rebranded a couple times. But my point here is that there is a creative problem solving process. And much in the same way that if you're familiar with DISC or Myers-Briggs or any of these personality profiles, is that we all have preferences for certain types of things, right? If you're an introvert or extrovert, it doesn't mean you can't do the other thing. It just means that it drains you. And if we look at the creative problem solving process, we all have our preferences, that there's actually 4 key components in the creative problem solving process. And the first, and again, I'll go through all of them, and they're all important and they all are iterative. So it's not like it's linear, you get done. I mean, it might be that you go back, like you were saying, oh, here's a critic, let's go back to visioning. So the first phase they call clarifying. So first of all, what is the problem? Are we clarifying what the problem is? And some people love to clarify problems, and some people go, oh my gosh, let's just get started. Can't do this. So once we clarify what the problem actually is, the next phase is ideation. So let's generate a whole bunch of ideas. And the goal here is we're striving for quantity. We want wild ideas. We want ideas that would get us fired, because right now we're not doing anything other than coming up with as many different ideas that could potentially address this problem as possible without judging them in any way. And what we find is that the low-hanging fruit gets picked first, and then we kind of go through this desert phase, and then we come out and come up with some really cool, wild, innovative stuff. Then, once we have all the ideation and all the ideas, we want to go through the ideas and start to what we call the developing phase, which is now start to put it through some kind of criteria, whether it's what's the ease of use, the cost to implement, etc., to figure out how do we separate the great ideas from the good ideas, from the lousy ideas, from the horrible ideas, right? We want to start to rank those in some way. And then that's the third phase. And then the fourth phase is to implement. So we have to go ahead and do something with that. And what we might find is when we start to implement, we learn something and we go, oh, now we have new information, and we go back somewhere else, back to clarify, back to ideate, back. So anyway, that's what we see. If you look at almost everyone's who kind of talks about, this is my change model, underneath it, you're going to see clarify, ideate, develop, and implement almost everywhere, because that's what we do as humans. So I wanted to call that out for the audience because it's such a useful framework. And I know for myself, there's a tool called Foresight. It's Foursight. It's a company. They actually do a profile where you can go through and get an assessment in this. My wife is actually certified in this. She actually has a master's in creative problem solving. So this is where I learned all this stuff.
Wow.
And so the idea is, like, I know that I prefer implementer. Notice I didn't say I am an implementer. That's the crutch. Like, that's the label. Like, I'm an extrovert. I prefer implementation, which means that when we're like in the idea phase, I'm like, I want to take something and just get started in doing it, because I am so much more comfortable doing things that way. Other people are not. So it's just a good thing to start to reflect for all of us. What is your preference around creative problem solving?
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. I mean, why label ourselves? You sit beautifully in that zone, of course,
Yeah.
but it doesn't mean that you're not able to sit in the other areas too, which is wonderful. Let's talk about kind of the top 4 things that foster in innovation. I mean, I know that some of the things that you've already spoken about, certainly you have to have, you have to have the openness to be able to do that. But let's talk about some of those things, and maybe even in aspects of that. There may be some aspects that you can really see as a leader. And even if we're kind of creating an environment, even if we are on our own or only have a small team, there may be some things that you see leaders doing that stops that whole process. So let's unpack this.
Sure thing. So the 4 things, and this is great. And it's great that we actually frame this with the creative problem solving process, because now people have that bedrock to stand on. So the first thing is, do you have a strategy? So many people talk about, we want to innovate, but what's your why? What is it you're actually hoping to achieve from this? So innovating for innovation's sake, well, what are you going to get to with that? So we need to have a strategy for sure. And then the next thing around, another key component to innovating, is ideas. That is not just coming up with them, but do we have a process for how we're going to take those ideas and start to incubate them? Which ones are we going to start to develop now? Which ones are we not, right? So in terms of that, which leads to the third one, which is around process. Right. So what is our process for moving ideas into, we can call it beta or experimentation or prototyping? Do we have some kind of a process to be able to do something with those ideas, given the resources and the capacity, the capability, whether it's time, money, people, etc., talent? We want to do that. And then the fourth one is around the climate. Have we created a climate for innovation that people can really thrive? And so I do a lot of training with leaders in organizations that all say, we want to be innovative. I mean, if I have yet to meet an organization that says, we don't actually want innovation here, because clearly this is the competitive advantage for 2020 and beyond, and it has been for some time. So if I was to say, of those 4, strategy, ideas, process, and climate, which is the most important? Surprise, surprise, it's climate, right? Because without that, it's like, if you don't have the right, to use a gardening metaphor here, if you don't have the right soil, it doesn't matter what seeds you put into it, they're not going to take fruit. And that's, and so this is why, if we look across change efforts, why they say that somewhere between 80 to 85% of change efforts fail. And John Cotter, who is a professor at Harvard and is kind of considered the world's foremost eminent authority on change, he wrote a book called Leading Change. He wrote, change fails, it's not because of strategy or process. It's always as a result of changing the behavior of people. So it's creating this climate. And so in my work, particularly with leadership, I look at what are the elements, because everyone goes, okay, I get that. Now, I'm a practical guy. So you say, okay, Alain, thanks for that. What do I do now? You're saying I have to create a climate. I'm not a gardener. I'm a leader. What do I do? So I've broken climate into 4 key components that I think are really important. The first is safety. People need to feel safe, both physically safe and psychologically safe. If I say to you, and I've said this to many, hundreds of groups, have you ever been witness to an idea assassination? Everyone laughs, right? Because we all know what that's like.
Yeah, I know exactly.
Exactly. Like like an idea, right? You're in a meeting and someone's like, we tried that before. Done. Right? Or that'll never work. That's too expensive. Right? Shut down. And you can see people just shut up, right? we have to realize that new ideas are like small infants, and we love our little infants. And like, you have to be really delicate with these infants. And so we have to be gentle. And so the first thing around this is them to speak up. And there's all sorts of, I mean, if we had more time, I can go through all sorts of tools and techniques on how to create more safety. I mean, the general principle here behind it is you have to lead with positive intent, is that you have to welcome people. And it helps to model this, is that right now realize we're not implementing anything. And at this point in the process, every idea is a good idea, if only because someone had it. Maybe it's the most wacky, crazy, stupid idea you ever heard. And you can say, Anne-Marie, thanks for the idea. Thank you. Because really, there's nothing lost by you not having to shoot it down. There's nothing, there's nothing, and there's nothing gained by doing so. But there's a huge cost if you start to shoot it down, because maybe Anne-Marie's your next idea, or the one after that, because it doesn't, the problem with idea assassination is it doesn't have to happen to you to affect you. If you see, oh, that's the way ideas are treated around here, I'm keeping mine to myself, right?
Yeah, it's so true. And, one thing that I heard from the example that you shared about the, the incontinence,
Yeah.
yeah. Had they not followed that idea and taken it further, it would never have gotten to where it is. And so the idea that someone may share may never have the opportunity to be pulled apart and to be twisted and whatever it is.
Exactly.
The rolling of the eyes and the, and I think we need to be very careful about how we approach it and say, that is a fabulous idea. Let's dive into that. Or as you say, maybe say, look, let's write that down, because I love that idea at the moment. We'll move through these things, but at the end of today, maybe we can unpack that, or that kind of thing. How you approach that is going to foster the one of keeping quiet.
Exactly. And what you're talking about here, Anne-Marie, and this is another principle of creative problem solving, is that there's two main phases to all this. And I'll use a little diagram with my hands. The first phase we'll call the diverge phase. When you're generating ideas, we are wanting to diverge and like come up with as many. So we're striving for quantity. We're not worried about if anything is good. So yes, that's a good idea, because what we know and all the science will tell us is the best way to come up with the best ideas is to be able to choose from the biggest pool of ideas. Right? There's been some great research done. And I'll give you one example. They had a group of pottery, college level art students doing pottery. And they said, okay, they broke them into two groups. Group one, your final grade is going to get judged on the quality of your best piece of work. Okay. That's it. Group two, you're going to get judged on the quantity of all the work you do, not the quality. Just the sheer quantity of work. Okay, that's group two. Now, at the end, they had all the work, and they had a group of judges deciding who had the best work. Which group do you think had the best quality of work between group one, which was judged by quality, and the group two was quantity? Who do you think had the best work?
Quantity.
Of course.
Because
it's quantity.
You keep going and keep perfecting and keep changing.
Exactly, because it's all about progress. It's about you're learning. This is about learning. And I think for entrepreneurs, this is so important, right? Why you have to keep doing something different every day and learning and then going, what's new? I mean, I'm doing this in my business constantly. We're all, and particularly this year, I mean, last year, this wall was not painted this color and that light was not there. I mean, I have gone from face-to-face to virtual. I mean, this is all, the home studio, figuring this all. I mean, we're all having to reinvent ourselves. So this is a whole key component, is that it's diverge. And then after we diverge, then it's converge. That's coming up and selecting the best out of the best. And that's having those criteria. And so if we try to do both at the same time, and I'm sure you've had this experience, it's like trying to write a term paper in university where you're writing and editing yourself at the same time, where it takes you 3 hours to write a single paragraph. Because what you have to do, and I'll change her words slightly, is when you're in the ideation phase, you have to take the brakes off. And you have to let yourself go and be comfortable with a really messy, ugly first draft. It's like, I'm just putting it out there. because it's so much easier to edit and refine and change things later. But until you get that first draft out there, it's in your head. You're like, and you're suffering from that slave of the perfectionistic mindset. Like, oh, I want to get it perfect. And the problem that we have when we see all those wacky, crazy ideas that have come to fruition, whether it was the Dyson vacuum cleaner or all we see as the consumer is the end result. We didn't see the iterations. We didn't see, and we tend to judge things from the end. What we don't see is the process. So to become better innovators, we have to learn how to fall in love with the process, which involves getting messy. And I know when I've written a book, and I know that I have to go through the ugly phase. There's no other way. And I'm like, oh, I'm in it and I can feel it. I'm like, I'm in the ugly phase. Yes. I would love to say it gets better, and it does because it just gets more familiar. I wish it would go away. It's, people say, oh, do you like writing? I say, I like having written, right? There's a difference.
Yeah.
There's a difference between those two things. So anyway, I know we're kind of taking you slightly off track. So we're talking about the 4 things, right? When I go back to your big question. So safety is number 1, right? So we talked about, and I think this is critical, and why I'm spending so much time on this is because without safety, you really can't progress beyond. So learning how to create a safe environment for people. And by the way, this is true for leading teams. It's the number 1 factor. Google did a whole study on this. Number 1 factor is psychological safety, that people have to feel that they can speak up, that they have equal amounts of airtime, that they're not going to get shut down. We all know teams where 1 or 2 people dominate, and those really aren't teams. They're functional groups. So that's number 1, safety. Another key component for innovation, and this is true for leadership as well, is energy. We've got to give people an environment where they are energized. And unfortunately, particularly in our organizational environments, there are a lot of people doing a lot of stupid stuff, right? Whether they're stupid meetings, whether they're stupid reports, whether they're just having to process batches of emails that mean nothing. Something like 61% of our time is eaten up on average with meetings and emails. And so how much time does that leave you to actually get to the work that matters? It's something like 5.5 hours a week we get out of 40. So we have to, if we want to create a climate that's going to foster innovation, is how do we kill those stupid rules? How do we get the stupid stuff out of the system and simplify things? So I'm a huge believer in the practical. Like my book has got a whole chapter on making things simple. Like here's 25 things to make meetings simpler. Here are 20 things to make email simpler, because you know what? Not everyone needs to be copied on everything. Yes, technology enables us to do that. But one of my rules with technology is just because you can doesn't mean you should, right?
Yeah,
it's so easy.
So important. We've got Dean Sprague here saying, I love brainstorming sessions, and thank you for sharing that. And, you're talking about kind of fostering this culture and then also getting rid of some of those unnecessary complexities. We know with creativity, and I don't know, maybe this is just me, but when you talk about energy, you need to create a space that allows that energy and those ideas to flow. And sometimes it's not just as easy as, okay, we got 5 minutes to do, and it's kind of like, okay, no, I got nothing. So it really is, as you said, getting rid of all of those things that can inhibit people. Because do you find though that a lot of times organizations don't recognize that some of these unnecessary complexities is stopping their teams individually and then also collaboratively from coming up with some of these wonderful ideas that could just be the solution for the challenge that they're faced?
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, I found early in my work, and I was doing a lot of work with innovation workshops, and a colleague and I who were working with these things, people say, all these tools that you're teaching us are great. But the problem is our lives are so overloaded with this unnecessary complexity that we don't have time to use these ideas to get to the work that matters. So these two things go hand in hand, which is why we have to create energy. And, I love the comment. I love brainstorming sessions. We have to realize that different people are wired differently. So when it comes to brainstorming, in fact, they would say, first, it's really useful to let people brainstorm individually on their own. And some people actually need time the day before. Just, not everyone's like, okay, what are your best ideas? Go in a group, go. Like some people can do that. And yes, there's a place to, to build on the ideas of others, but some of us need that quiet, alone, reflective time to think and meditate on this before we can come out. And so as leaders, again, this is why we have to be such students of psychology and understanding that different people think and act in different ways, and creating environments that allow all people to be included, because one or two people aren't going to be able to have all the great ideas. So
Yeah.
that's another big piece.
Look, everything that we're talking about today, and I know we've just really scratched the surface, but I think where we're at within, when we think about all different industries, all around the world, this is something that is no longer would be nice to have. This is so important because, as we know, and we've heard the saying before, things change so quickly. There's so much uncertainty. Organizations need to be, and the word that I'm looking for escapes me, but they need to be responsive to have insight, but also foresight, and often foresight and insight comes from hindsight.
Yes.
And we need to foster a team of people who are always kind of shifting and being able to always come up and problem solve. And something that you said, and I want to just speak into this as well, that we know with innovation, we know with new ideas, there comes a risk that, hey, maybe that idea won't work out as well as what we had expected, but create a culture and foster a culture of, you know what, we're going to give it our best shot, but we're going to go with didn't work out so well. Let's also embrace that, but let's take the learnings from that, because the second time, because what you shared about the quantity of products rather than the quality, and entrepreneurship is all about risk taking and trying something and working on the back of failing forward. We know that. So talk a little bit about that, because I think often as leaders too, and that this is sometimes because we don't, and oh no, it didn't work, that we're going to have to go through all of this. We need to be mindful as well to be able to embrace those failures, but allow our team, okay, how are we going to, what can we learn? What can we put in place? Talk a little bit about that, because that's something that I think a lot of organizations struggle with too.
Very much so. And in some ways, Anne-Marie, that does go back to climate, right? Because much in the same way that people shoot down ideas, how do we respond to, and I'll put it in quotes, air quotes, failure, right? What does failure mean? Just, it just means that we haven't figured it out yet. I love this idea of, and the person that talks about this great is Carol Dweck. If people haven't found out about who Carol Dweck is, her classic book is Mindset. And she talks about the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, has completely embraced her ideas and changed the Microsoft culture when he came in. And she talks about this idea of, wouldn't it be great that if someone didn't pass a grade in school, that instead of getting fail, you got a not yet, right? Just think about how different that makes you respond. If someone says, hey, I'd like to try to get certified in this thing, and somebody said, thank you for your audition, your performance, and our judgment is not yet, right? It's like that just shows you that you're on a continuum as opposed to fail, this fixed mindset moment in time, you are never going to be capable. And I think as leaders, we have to create organizations that are filled with a lot more not yets and a lot less failure, right? And so how do we support people in that? Because no one, otherwise we're going to be stuck. And and I think also, as you said, not only are things becoming more nimble, as both as employees and as customers, our expectations are going up and up and up and up. It's amazing. And this is, I go back to Amazon, because we all know what one click means now. Like if I can order with one click, whenever I'm somewhere and going, why does this take 30 clicks? This is ridiculous. Like I can do one click. I mean, there are other websites I would rather buy things from, but if I have to enter all my information and it's like, I'm sorry, but so it's all about removing the friction from the system. And so as we think about these things, both externally for our customers, but internally for our people, what are we doing to remove the friction? Why? And this is the willingness. Like if we had to replace ourselves with a group of consultants who saw all of our workflows and our processes, how many of those workflows and processes would stand up to the scrutiny of, why are you doing this? Because we've always done it that way, right? So it's the willingness to kill those stupid rules and to kind of think about doing things differently.
Yeah. I have a rule that, stupid rules, they're meant to be broken and challenged. You know, and only the rules. I mean, obviously within the context of an environment, you can create some wonderful parameters, guidelines that, you know, within that, go for your life. Let's change this. I love this comment that Lourdes said. Let me share this. Incentivizing some real good ideas, recognition of idea owners can motivate employees to participate. Which is true, isn't it? And that's one of the ways that we can certainly encourage people to do that. So thank you for commenting and leaving that comment. I know that we've, as I said, only just scratched the surface, and I love this. I mean, when you talk about brainstorming, it's like, when can we get started, you know? But something which I think is all organizations need to recognize too, and this kind of fits in beautifully to what you've already said, but around kind of the complexities and the structure and the format, is recognizing that everybody who is participating, we are all different in the way that we, you know, in our expectations, the way we do our best work. Some of us like to brainstorm and do things on our own together, and as to recognizing and not judge and not put what works for you on top of, you know, the expectation that that's how our team will do that. And when we recognize and create a space that allows people to show up as they do their best, then that is certainly going to be helpful as well. And I love the way that you said the not yet, because guess what? The nuances of who makes you is just not suited to that environment. But guess what? You step up on that stage, this is where you're going to shine, because it's the right time, right space, right place for you and in what you bring to the table. And I think, you know, creating an environment that fosters that is fantastic. Look, Alain, I know that you've got a way to connect with you, and you've got something special coming up. Would you share that before we finish the show?
Sure. Thanks, Anne-Marie. Yeah. So a couple ways people can connect with me. So I have this book that came out that gets into a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about. The book's called Cracking the Leadership Code, and you can actually find it at www.crackingtheleadershipcode.com. You can read all about the book. You can actually download the first chapter right there. And if you like that, you can order it from there or Amazon or anywhere else with 1 or 2 clicks. And then the other thing is that takes you right to my website. Now, one of the things I was mentioning to Anne-Marie before we went on air is I am launching on October the 5th a 30-day online leadership challenge, basically taking the principles from the book and using principles of positive psychology and habit formation and gamification. We're basically being able to do this with an online community, a closed community, in something between 5 and 8 minutes a day. It's going to be great. There's information on my alainhunkins.com website if you just scroll down to 30-day challenge. But one offer I wanted to make for anyone watching live or hearing this before September 28th, when registration closes, is I'm making 4 spaces available to listeners of this particular show. So if you're interested, we'll do a raffle for anyone interested, and we'll close the raffle up on September 25th in case you don't hear it live. So it's not first come, first serve. They'll get yourself in there first, and just email me. My name, it's Alain, ALAIN, at Alain Hunkins. That's ALAINHUNKINS.com. So email me, Alain, at AlainHunkins.com, and basically put in the subject line Anne-Marie Cross ticket, and then just write like, I'd like a spot in your challenge, and then you will be entered into the raffle. And if we have 4 people, then you've got a spot. But if we have more than 4 people, I'll do a random number generator and we'll pick 4 from this. But wanted to share that out with you, and you can read all about the challenge on the website as well.
Yeah, well, wonderful. Thank you so very much. Can I just ask, just randomly, because I'm just interested, it's my show and I can, your name, Ella, with the spelling, is that French?
It is. It's a French name. My mother is from Brussels, Belgium. She grew up French speaking. So Alain is one of the most common names you'll find in a French speaking country. I have an older brother whose name is Serge. And I grew up in Flushing, Queens, right in New York City, where not really people could call me Alain. But for a while I went by Alan, but it never really fit. So I'm an Alain. So there you go.
There you go. Well, you know what? I'm glad that I asked how you pronounce your name right at the beginning of the show, because I've been through a whole show, and then at the end of it, after we've stopped recording, they go, actually, it's pronounced so and so. So anyway, I'm glad we got that. But loved today's conversation. I know that many people who've been listening have gained some insights from that. But cracking the leadership code, grab the book, grab registration, and put your name forward for what I'm sure is going to be an incredibly just amazing 30 days, especially when you add gamification into it, because studies have showed that gamification, people love that. There's something really inspiring about that too. And we're hearing, if you can incorporate some of that within the work that you do, it's almost come a little bit of competitiveness in there too, isn't there? Has that got something to,
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't know about you. I'm on, I'm on this language app. You may have Duolingo. I've been learning foreign languages, and I have this 658-day streak, and I cannot break my streak at this point. And then every week, I'm in a new cohort with new people, and if I don't stay within the bottom 10, I get demoted to the next league. It's amazing how they have all these different things to keep me engaged in the practice.
Yeah.
Right?
My daughter has got that on Snapchat. They have those streaks.
Yeah.
What's the streak? She goes, because they were talking, I've got this 435-day streak. I said, what is that? And they have to take a picture of that. But it's like that, isn't it? And if you can incorporate that into some of the things you're doing, it really does work. Well, we would start a whole other show if we started that topic. And I know that it's in the afternoon, evening for you.
Yeah.
So I'm reticent of the time that we don't want to take up any more of your time, but get onto the challenge, get a copy of Alain's book, and thanks once again for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you. It's been my pleasure, Anne-Marie. Thank you so much.